Snow whispered against the windows like it had secrets to tell, brushing past the frosted panes of Boone Callahan's ranch house on the edge of the Wyoming frontier. It had been falling since dawn, a steady hush that dulled the world to stillness. Boone sat at the fire, hands rough as bark folded in his lap, eyes lost in the slow dance of embers. Outside, the world was white and cold and godless, but in here there was warmth and the aching, terrible silence of a man with too much space around his heart. Then he saw her. At first, just a shape out past the barn, dark against the snow, crumpled like a fallen fawn. Boone stood without thought, coat already in hand, boots striking the floor like the hooves of a slow-moving ox. He pushed through the door into the wind, which grabbed at his coat and flung snow in his face like spite. The figure didn't move. She was barely conscious when he reached her, her skin icy and bloodless, dark hair matted to her forehead. Comanche, he guessed, though half-starved and draped in a torn shawl that had long since surrendered to the cold. He gathered her up gently. She was so light, it felt like shame to carry her. Inside, he laid her on the cot near the stove. Steam rose from her hair as the fire did its work. Her lips moved, whispers in a language he didn't know. Boone placed a folded blanket across her middle, then stood back, as if afraid his very presence might disturb her last grip on this world. He didn't ask questions. He made broth instead. For 3 days, she drifted in and out of fever. Boone kept the fire fed and the water warm. Her skin, once blue with cold, began to color again. On the 4th day, her eyes opened, clear, dark, watchful. She said nothing. Neither did he. She ate with her hands at first, cautious, feral. But she didn't refuse the food, didn't run. That alone was something. The next morning, she was sitting up, fingers combing through her tangled hair. Boone placed a mug of coffee on the table beside her. She didn't touch it, just watched him with eyes that dared him to speak. He didn't. Instead, he picked up a carving knife and resumed work on a half-finished buffalo figurine, one of dozens lining his mantel. When the stove crackled, she flinched. He didn't look up, only reached out slowly and adjusted the kettle lid to quiet the noise. That night, as he slept upright in his chair, he heard her footsteps on the floorboards, soft as moth wings. He didn't open his eyes. But come morning, the buffalo carving had been turned on the shelf, facing the window now, as though she wanted it to see the snow. The next time he went into town, the whispers started before he hit the general store porch. Fat Boone Callahan's got a squaw in his house, muttered Miss Willa Prentice behind her glass counter. Lord knows what he paid her in. Boone didn't answer, just bought flour, lamp oil, and winter apples. She'll leave like the last one, Willa added, voice louder now. That mail-order girl who spat at you on the platform. Remember her? Clara Ellsworth? Pretty thing. Wouldn't even touch your arm. The words didn't sting like they had back then. Not exactly. They settled instead in the hollow places where memory still lived. He'd stood on the platform in his best jacket, clutching a flower he'd picked himself. Clara had taken one look and recoiled, told the crowd he smelled like lard and loneliness. Then she'd laughed. So had the others. Boone had dropped the flower without even realizing. He rode home slower that day. But when he reached the ranch, a quiet surprise waited on the porch. Wyandotte, wrapped in a blanket, facing the mountains. She didn't look at him as he tied up his horse. He stood beside her anyway. The wind pulled at her braid. You don't need to stand out here, he said softly. She didn't answer, just closed her eyes and breathed in the cold. He stepped back inside, leaving the door ajar. Moments later, she followed. In the kitchen, he ladled stew into a bowl and set it on the table. She sat without being asked. Boone pretended to focus on washing dishes, but caught her watching him. Curious now, not guarded. He risked a question. What's your name? She blinked at him. Then, quiet as snow slipping from a branch, she said, Wyandotte. It was the first word she'd spoken to him. And somehow, it felt like more than a name. It felt like permission. The next day, he found her humming. Not loudly, just a low melody as she braided strands of horsehair into a rope by the fire. The tune was older than language. Boone could feel it. He offered her a carving knife. You can make one too if you'd like. She took it carefully holding it like a sacred object. When he reached for another log, their hands brushed. She didn't pull away, but she didn't look at him either. The world outside still held its breath in frost and wind. Inside, the air grew warmer, quieter. One night, as a storm raged beyond the walls, Boone pulled a letter from the mantel. The same envelope that had arrived months ago. Clara Ellsworth's crisp rejection. Wyanetta saw it, frowned, then walked over. She took the letter from his hand, tore it in half, then quarters, and fed it to the fire. Boone stared at the flames, not because of the letter, but because she'd done it without asking. "You didn't need to," he murmured. Her eyes were calm, steady. "She judged the outside," she said. "Not the hands that made the bread, not the fire that kept her warm. It wasn't just about Clara." He knew that. She spoke of herself, too, of being passed over, stepped around, seen as less. They were both ghosts in their own lives, waiting to be called back into flesh. He said nothing more. But that night, as snow thickened outside, he heard the soft scrape of her mat being pulled beside his chair. She didn't speak, didn't reach for him, just lay there, near the fire, near him. Boone closed his eyes and, for the first time in years, let the silence feel like comfort. But as morning painted the frost in gold and pink, a rider approached the ranch. Small figure, white bonnet, red cheeks flushed by the cold. Boone stepped onto the porch, heart tightening. The girl dismounted slowly and held out a letter. "I'm June Ellsworth," she said. "My sister was supposed to marry you, but she ran off with a gambler in Denver. I came in her place." Wyanetta, watching from the doorway, said nothing. But her gaze did not waver. The snow had softened by mid-morning, and a light filtering through the clouds cast the land in shades of silver and ash. Boone stood stiff on the porch, one hand braced against the post, the other holding the letter June Ellsworth had handed him. She looked nothing like her sister, wide-eyed, nervous, her bonnet askew and boots too clean for a winter trail. Her fingers trembled as she tugged her shawl tighter. "I know this ain't proper," she said, voice brittle, "but Pa said someone had to make it right. Clara humiliated you. He said you were owed something." Boone's throat tightened. He glanced back over his shoulder. Through the half-open door, Wyanetta sat by the fire, hands working a braid of horsehair into a pattern he'd never seen before. She didn't look up, but he knew she was listening. "I didn't ask to be owed," he said, his voice low, roughened by the cold and something deeper. "I only asked to be seen." June blinked, unsure whether she'd been insulted or absolved. She took a cautious step forward. "I won't be like her. I try to be kind, honest." Boone stepped down into the snow, boots crunching through the fresh powder. The letter crumpled in his palm. "You're kind already," he said. "That's clear enough. But kindness shouldn't be born from guilt." Behind him, Wyanetta rose. Her shawl fell around her shoulders, and she stepped through the door like a shadow emerging into morning. She didn't speak to June. She didn't need to. Their eyes met, woman to woman, and something unspoken passed between them. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or understanding. June lowered her eyes and nodded once, then turned to her horse. Boone helped her into the saddle. "There's warmth at the Prentice place," he said. "Tell them I sent you." She looked back just once before riding off into the pale wind. Boone stayed outside until the sound of hooves faded completely. Then he turned and saw Wyanetta still standing at the threshold, arms crossed, her face unreadable. He reached her slowly, the way one might approach a deer, calm, measured, careful not to startle. "She came to fix what her sister broke," he said. Wyanetta studied him for a long time, then stepped aside so he could enter. No words, just the soft creak of floorboards under shared weight. That night, the silence between them was different, charged, coiled. Boone moved slower, as though the air itself demanded reverence. He set another log in the fire. She offered him a bowl of food without meeting his gaze. It wasn't rejection. It was waiting. When the fire burned low, she finally spoke. "My brother," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "was the last of my people I had left. He was shot stealing corn from soldiers' camp. They left his body for the wolves." Boone sat down slowly. His chair groaned under his weight, but the sound didn't disturb her. "I walked 6 days," she continued. I traded what little I had for food for warmth. My name was used like currency. I thought maybe I'd stop being a person altogether. Maybe I'd just disappear into snow. Boone's chest tightened. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. You didn't disappear, he said. You arrived. She looked up then, eyes catching firelight and something softer. Why didn't you ask me anything? Didn't think you'd want me to. I didn't, she admitted. But it mattered. Boone lowered his head. People don't ask much about me either. They think they already know. She tilted her head, studying him now. Not with caution, but curiosity. What do they say? That I'm too big for the saddle. That I scare off women. That I was born wrong and stayed that way. The quiet that followed was heavier than anything the blizzard ever brought. You're gentle, she said. They don't see that. He laughed softly, a sound like boots on fresh hay. Guess gentle don't make for good gossip. No, she said, but make for a good fire. Their eyes held then, and in the shared silence, a thread was drawn between them, thin, delicate, but real. Boone stood, walked to the mantel, and took down one of his carvings, a buffalo, worn smooth by years of passing fingers. He handed it to her. My father used to say, buffalo don't run from storms, he said. They walk straight into the wind. It hurts less that way. She took the figure in both hands, running her fingers over the grooves. Maybe I've been running too long. No, Boone said gently. You just stopped in the wrong places. She looked up. And this place? Boone shrugged. Fire's warm. Roof don't leak. And you're here. That night, she didn't lay her mat by the fire. She sat beside his chair, her head against the worn armrest, eyes closed. He stayed awake a long while, watching her breathe, listening to the wind scrape against the walls like a hungry thing denied entry. At dawn, she was still there. They rose with the light, wordless in their motions. She brewed the coffee. He chopped the wood. The rhythm of their survival became ritual. Late that morning, Boone hitched the wagon. Ride with me into town? He asked. Wyandotte hesitated, then nodded. The journey was quiet but not uncomfortable. The snow had settled into drifts along the edges of the road. Trees stood cloaked in white, their branches trembling beneath the weight of silence. As they approached the town, the air changed, tense, thinner. People stopped what they were doing, stared. At the general store, Miss Willa Prentice stepped out, hands on her hips, apron stained with flour. Well, I'll be, she said, the savage and the cow-eyed rancher. Boone didn't flinch. He climbed down from the wagon and helped Wyandotte descend. Her braid was loose today, falling over one shoulder like a river of midnight. Miss Willa sniffed. Thought you had better sense, Boone. He turned to her, calm as mountain stone. Say what you want. I know what we are. Wyandotte met the older woman's gaze, unflinching. A hush fell over the street. No one laughed. No one dared. Inside, Boone handed a carved buffalo to a boy clutching his mother's skirts. The child's eyes lit up. Take it, Boone said. For luck. The mother hesitated, then nodded her thanks. Wyandotte stood nearby, watching the exchange with something that looked like pride. They left the store hand in hand, not for show, but because it felt right. Like two pieces finally returned to the same page of an old, forgotten book. As the wagon creaked back toward home, Boone glanced sideways at her. You still think about leaving? She shook her head. No, but I still wonder why I stayed. He smiled. Maybe we're both buffalo, tired of running. She looked ahead, where snow began to fall again, softer now, like a blessing instead of a burden. Behind them, in the shadowed distance, another rider appeared, slim, fast, urgent. A telegram in his hand. His horse galloped hard, as though the news it carried might shatter everything they'd just begun to build.